had finally found it, the perfect lakefront property. The kind of place most people only dream about, tucked away between towering pines, with a wooden dock that stretched far enough into the water for a peaceful morning of fishing. It was serene, almost surreal, and I could picture myself spending weekends here, casting lines, hearing the gentle splash of fish, and letting the world fade away. I had moved here to escape the chaos of city life, to find a space that felt truly mine, a sanctuary I could call home. But I quickly learned that paradise sometimes comes with unexpected battles. It began subtly. The first week, I noticed a few dead fish floating near the edge of the lake. First, I dismissed it. Lakes occasionally lose a few fish due to natural causes, storms, temperature shifts, or algae blooms. But soon, the smell became noticeable. A strange chemical tang in the air, almost sweet but rotten, lingering over the water. It was the kind of smell that makes your stomach turn without warning, the kind that signals trouble. I decided to investigate, walking along the shoreline, checking the water, looking for anything unusual. That's when I saw them. A small group of HOA officials carrying buckets and containers, moving stealthily along the water's edge. They weren't fishing or cleaning the lake. They were stirring something in the water, whispering to one another, glancing around as if they didn't want to be caught. My stomach sank. Something about the way they moved, the secrecy, the way they looked at each other, it didn't feel right. I approached cautiously, keeping my voice steady despite the rising tension in my chest. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to sound calm, trying not to give away how alarmed I truly felt. One of them looked at me with a blank expression, almost as if I didn't exist. "We're protecting the community," they said, and for a moment, I thought I misheard them. "Protecting the community?" I repeated, my voice sharper this time. "By poisoning my lake?" They exchanged glances, smirking, and walked away as if they had every right to do what they were doing. I stood there, frozen, realizing the full extent of what had just happened. They weren't just meddling in my property. They were trying to control me, to stop me from enjoying the very thing I had come here for. And worse, they thought they could do it without consequences. I spent the next few days documenting everything. High-resolution cameras installed around the dock, water samples taken discreetly, notes on their schedules, observations of every interaction. Every dead fish, every chemical odor, every suspicious movement. I recorded it all. I knew I needed proof. This wasn't just about me wanting to fish in peace. This was about someone trying to exert control over my property illegally, and potentially endangering more than just the lake. Then it hit me, the horrifying truth. The water they were contaminating didn't just belong to me. It was connected to the community's water supply. The HOA, in their arrogance, had completely overlooked the fact that their own homes, their families, the children they claimed to protect, relied on this same water. Their faucets, showers, and drinking water came from the lake I owned. Suddenly, their little power trip had escalated from a petty dispute into a full-blown public health risk. I realized I had to act carefully. I couldn't just confront them directly. They were bold, reckless, and had already proven that they were willing to break rules to get their way. But I could use their own arrogance against them. I could show the world what they had done. I could make them accountable. I started reaching out to local authorities, cautiously at first, just hinting at the contamination and the suspicious behavior I had documented. I made sure my evidence was airtight before taking any further steps. Videos of them dumping chemicals, timestamps, water samples showing contamination, notes on their methods, it all needed to be irrefutable. I wasn't just protecting my lake. I was protecting every family that relied on that water, whether they knew it or not. As I compiled my evidence, the HOA became more desperate. They started checking the property more frequently, trying to catch me in the act of documenting, sending anonymous messages, attempting intimidation. But I stayed calm. Every encounter was recorded. Every word, every action, every attempt to bully me became part of the growing case against them. One evening, I caught them red-handed again, dumping a strange, frothy liquid into the lake near the dock. I didn't approach. I just filmed, zooming in, keeping my distance. My heart pounded, but I knew this moment would be pivotal. These were the pieces that would expose them. Every reaction they had, every careless move was evidence. They were so confident in their own impunity that they didn't realize they were building the case that would bring them down. The tension in the community started to rise. Neighbors whispered, sharing rumors about fish dying and chemical smells. Some were angry, but most were scared. And that was when I realized the power of the truth. People fear what they don't understand, but when facts are undeniable, fear turns into action. Then came the day I discovered the final piece of the puzzle. I followed the water intake pipes that fed into the neighborhood. And there it was, proof that the water they were poisoning wasn't just in my lake. It circulated through the entire community. Their arrogance had blinded them. In trying to control me, they had risked their own health, their families, and every neighbor who trusted them to act responsibly. I knew it was time to escalate. I contacted the state health department, sharing my findings, my evidence, and my concerns. I explained, in meticulous detail, what had been happening and how dangerous it was. I had to remain professional, objective, unemotional, because these were serious accusations, and any mistake could undermine everything. Within days, authorities arrived. Water tests confirmed what I already suspected. Contamination levels that were not just illegal, but potentially dangerous. The HOA officials who had smiled smugly just weeks before were suddenly panicked, scrambling to explain themselves, fumbling over excuses that no one believed. Their plan had completely backfired. I watched as the truth spread. Neighbors demanded answers. Local news picked up the story, and social media exploded. The HOA had tried to wield power through fear and control, but they underestimated the combination of evidence, accountability, and public attention. Their actions were exposed, and the consequences were only beginning. And through it all, I remained calm. I had my lake, my peace, and the knowledge that I had done everything right. But one thing was clear. This was more than just about fishing. This was about standing up to those who believe rules apply to everyone else but them. And in that moment, I realized that sometimes the smallest acts of courage can trigger the largest consequences. When the state health department arrived, the HOA's smugness evaporated almost instantly. The same officials who had strutted along my dock, tossing chemicals into the water with a sense of superiority, were now fumbling, nervously glancing at each other as their actions came under scrutiny. Their faces were pale, their excuses clumsy, and for the first time, I saw real fear in their eyes. They had believed they were untouchable, operating above the law. But the moment the authorities stepped onto the scene, the tables turned completely. I watched as technicians in protective gear collected water samples, testing for contaminants I had already documented. They traced the intake pipes, measured levels, and confirmed what I had feared. The water they had poisoned, the water they had risked so arrogantly, fed the entire community. Faucets, showers, even the local school's drinking fountains, they all drew from my lake. And the HOA had not considered a single consequence beyond their petty desire to stop me from fishing. While the tests were being run, I stayed on the dock, silently observing the chaos. I had recorded everything. High-definition videos of every moment the officials had tampered with the water. Time-stamped notes documenting their routines. Photographs of the dead fish, of the discoloration spreading across the surface of the lake. Evidence stacked so high it would be impossible for them to deny. News crews began to arrive as well. Local reporters, alerted by neighbors and social media, showed up with cameras and microphones. The story had gone viral in a matter of hours. Footage of the poisoned lake, of officials caught red-handed, and my own commentary explaining the risks made headlines almost immediately. The HOA, which had once controlled the narrative, now found itself at the mercy of public exposure. I remember the moment clearly. One of the HOA board members, the one who had been most aggressive in trying to intimidate me, was cornered by a reporter live on camera. The journalist asked about the chemicals, about why they had interfered with my property, about whether they knew the water served the community. The official stammered, sweat dripping down his temple, trying to come up with some explanation that would make sense. But there was none. Their arrogance had blinded them, and now it was unraveling in real time. Meanwhile, I continued my own investigation. I interviewed neighbors, documented their reactions, and compiled their testimonies alongside the scientific evidence. Each person I spoke to reinforced the story. The HOA had overstepped, endangered lives, and assumed their authority extended far beyond reason. Their actions weren't just unethical, they were illegal, and the law was about to catch up with them. By the third day, the HOA was in full damage control mode. Emergency meetings were held behind closed doors. Lawyers were called. The board members tried to convince themselves that they could somehow spin the narrative. But the evidence was overwhelming. Videos, photos, water tests, public outrage. All converged in a way that left them scrambling, their credibility shattered. Their attempts to regain control were futile, and every move they made only made the situation worse. As the state authorities expanded their investigation, the scope of the contamination became clear. The chemicals used were not harmless. They could have caused serious illness, particularly among children and the elderly. The fact that the HOA had put themselves, their families, and the entire neighborhood at risk became a central theme in media coverage. Headlines screamed about negligence, exposure, and a power-hungry HOA that had poisoned its own community. During this time, I remained calm, knowing I had done everything correctly. I had documented, reported, and taken precautions. I had stayed rational while they had acted recklessly. And now, the consequences were unfolding exactly as they should. Justice, slow as it may sometimes seem, was finally catching up with those who had assumed they were above it. One evening, as I sat on my dock watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson, I realized how surreal the situation had become. The lake, once the symbol of my peace, had become a battlefield. But now it was also a symbol of triumph. Despite their attempts to intimidate me, despite their reckless poisoning, I had remained steadfast, patient, and strategic. And in doing so, I had protected more than just my property. I had protected an entire community. The legal ramifications began to pile up quickly. Fines, investigations, and lawsuits were all initiated against the HOA and the individuals responsible. Lawyers called, reporters demanded statements, and neighbors continued to express their outrage. The story became a case study in how power can corrupt, and how even the most confident individuals can fall when they underestimate the determination of a single person standing up for what is right. But beyond the legal consequences, the personal satisfaction was immense. The same officials who had once laughed at the idea of me taking action were now humbled, forced to confront the reality of their mistakes. Every casual glance they gave me now carried the weight of accountability. They could no longer ignore the evidence, the law, or the public scrutiny. Their arrogance had been their undoing, and I had simply been the catalyst. There were moments, too, that were darkly ironic. One HOA official, who had been most aggressive in threatening me, was caught on camera during an inspection, drinking water drawn directly from the lake. The very water he had tried to poison, the water he had risked contaminating with chemicals, was now in his own cup. The realization hit him immediately. His expression, a mix of shock and horror, was unforgettable. It was a stark reminder that actions driven by arrogance rarely end without consequences. As the weeks went by, the lake slowly returned to normal. Environmental specialists helped clean up the contamination, removing chemicals and restoring the water quality. Fish populations were monitored and gradually replenished. The lake, once again, became a place of peace and natural beauty. I returned to my fishing routine, casting lines at sunrise, the gentle ripples on the water reminding me of what had been at stake. Throughout the ordeal, I reflected on what had happened, not just for myself, but for the community. The HOA had assumed that they could control everything, that rules didn't apply to them, and that a single individual would be powerless in the face of their authority. They were wrong, and the lesson was clear. Preparation, patience, and unwavering commitment to the truth can overcome even the most audacious abuse of power. Neighbors, once skeptical or fearful, began to approach me, expressing gratitude for taking action. Some admitted they had wanted to speak out but were intimidated by the HOA's reputation. Others were simply relieved that someone had protected the lake, their water, and their health. I realized then that the impact of my actions extended far beyond the confines of my own property. In standing up for what was right, I had created a ripple effect, empowering others to demand accountability from those who abuse power. By the time the state completed its formal investigation, the outcome was decisive. The HOA was fined, board members faced personal liability, and multiple legal actions were underway. The story had drawn attention beyond the local community, serving as a cautionary tale for other neighborhoods and associations across the state. The arrogance that had fueled their actions had been dismantled by evidence, law, and public scrutiny. And yet, amidst all this, I found a sense of quiet triumph. Sitting on my dock, watching the water reflect the colors of the sunset, I knew that I had not just defended my property. I had defended the principles that mattered most. Accountability, truth, and courage had prevailed over recklessness and arrogance. The lake, my lake, was safe once again. In the weeks that followed, life began to normalize. The dead fish were gone, the chemical smell dissipated, and the community began to heal. Neighbors expressed newfound respect, and I continued my fishing without interference. But the memory of what had happened remained. A reminder of how fragile peace can be when those in power overreach, and how powerful a determined individual can be when armed with evidence and integrity. Looking back, I realized that this story isn't just about fishing or lakes or HOAs. It's about standing up to those who assume authority over others, about protecting what is rightfully yours, and about understanding that every action has consequences. The HOA's attempt to poison the lake was more than just a personal attack. It was a test of courage, strategy, and perseverance. And in the end, justice, patience, and truth won. I cast my line into the water one last time as the sun dipped below the horizon, the lake calm and clear. The ripples spread outward, carrying a message I hoped everyone would remember. Never underestimate the power of a single person standing up for what is right, because sometimes the smallest actions, like standing firm on your own dock, can have consequences far larger than anyone could imagine. And for those who think they can manipulate, intimidate, or control, the lesson is clear. Arrogance has a way of catching up with you, often when you least expect it. By the time night fell, the lake was quiet once more. Stars reflected in the water, the air crisp and clean. I leaned back, letting the peace of the lake wash over me, knowing that what had been taken from me, or attempted to be taken, was restored. And more importantly, the truth had been revealed, leaving those who thought they were untouchable with nothing but the reality of their actions and the weight of their mistakes. And that, more than anything else, was the victory.